Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and this is Novel Inc. And today we are talking about my favorite books of 2018. I read almost 170 books in 2018, so it's always hard for me to narrow down and make these lists. This year, you might have already seen my nonfiction favorites video because I decided to split my list into a nonfiction favorites and a fiction favorites. So today we are talking about good old fiction. I don't want this video to be terribly long, so I did narrow my list down to 10 books that I feel were my favorites. It was really hard for me to pick favorites this year, but I also have a couple honorable mentions that I want to really briefly just shout out. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. The first book I want to give an honorable mention to is Summer of Salt by Katrina Lino. I read an arc of this spring and absolutely adored this book. It was atmospheric and magical, and at its core it was a story about women and how women are goddamn magical and the things that women will do to protect the people and the things that they love. It was just really beautifully told and so atmospheric, and I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. Next on my list of honorable mentions is a book that gets pretty mixed reviews on BookTube, but that I really enjoyed. That's actually a pretty common theme throughout this list, you'll see, but that's Save the Date by Morgan Matson. I am a big Morgan Matson fan. Yes, she writes about white, straight, cis people. But, you know, I acknowledge that her books could do better in terms of diverse casts, and I enjoy them despite that. I particularly loved Save the Date, even though it tends to get very mixed reviews. It was a very different kind of book from Morgan Matson because it's set over such a short span of time. It's set over one weekend of a wedding, whereas most of her books take place over an entire summer. And I think that this new format really worked for her. She really was able to achieve a lot of character growth in the main character, Charlie, within that short span of time, a realistic amount of character growth within that span of time. And the thing that I loved most about Save the Date though, and the thing that resonated most with me and why it's ending up on my favorites list, is because I thought the sibling relationships were so well done, and Charlie's relationship with her siblings really reminded me of my relationship with my older brothers, and it was just really heartwarming and made me feel all the like sweet fuzzy family feels. My next honorable mention goes to Odd One Out by Nick Stone. I read an arc of this earlier this year that I picked up at BEA. Nick is a good friend of mine and she never disappoints me with her books. Again, this is one that's gotten pretty mixed reviews. I agree that this isn't perfect and some of the language in this book can come off as biphobic, and as someone who identifies as bi myself, I completely respect and understand that, and I think people's criticisms of this are valid. But for me, I thought that this was a beautiful exploration of the way that we think about our identity and how that can change over time, and how as we get to know ourselves more, sometimes our understanding of our identity and our sexuality changes, and that's okay. And it really challenged the idea of feeling forced to label yourself as any one thing. And overall, I think that if I had read this book in high school, I would have realized I was queer a lot earlier on. I just think this is a very important book and I really enjoyed it. Next honorable mention I want to give goes to Blanca y Roja by Anna Marie McLemore. I adored this. I adore all of Anna Marie McLemore's writing. I'm not a big fan of retellings usually, but something about Blanca y Roja really made it work for me. At its heart, it's a story about sisters and the relationship between these two women, and it's about family and identity and sexuality and gender, and it's just great. I loved it. Highly recommend, as I recommend all of her books. Last honorable mention I want to give is to Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertelli. Leah is my fat Slytherin bi queen. Again, a book that is not perfect, a character who has faults and doesn't always treat people in ways that I would choose to treat people. But I had to put this on the list because I saw so much of myself in Leah. Seeing so many parts of my identity represented in one character was really special for me, and I just love the Simon verse because these books are set in Atlanta, which is my home, and they in so many ways feel like a love letter to Atlanta and to Georgia, and I really appreciate that as well. And I just love seeing how the whole Creekwood gang's story wrapped up in this book. So again, not without its faults, but still a favorite. Okay, now we're gonna get into my actual top 10 books of the year. These are gonna be in no particular order, except I have saved my very favorite of the year for last. You probably can already guess what it is if you know me or if you've been watching my channel, but yeah, let's just go ahead and dive into the real list. First up, I want to talk about Red Clocks by Lainey Zumas. This is one that I read really early on in 2018, and it has really stuck with me all year. The first quarter of the year was a very subpar One, in terms of reading, I just was reading lots of books that I enjoyed, but not a lot of books that I loved. However, Red Clocks was one that really stands out to me as a book that I loved, and again, one that has stuck with me all year. Red Clocks is speculative fiction set in the very, very near future of our world, and in this version of our future, abortion and in vitro fertilization have been outlawed, and we follow 4 different women who are dealing with this in different ways. I thought the multiple perspectives in Red Clocks were handled brilliantly. I actually listened to this on audio and I thought that was well done as well. It was so harrowing and it was so vivid and so scarily close to our current reality that I think that overall is what really made this stick with me. Red Clocks really dives into the actual implications of such a law being passed, and I think that is what made it work so well for me, and the ways in which it affects these women's lives feel so real. And you know, we see this law affecting international relations because of women trying to flee the US and cross the border to Canada to get abortions, and we see it impacting like every aspect of life in society. And I just, again, thought this was just a really brilliant exploration of reproductive rights, and I would highly, highly recommend reading it. Switching gears completely, the next book on my list is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This is one of my absolute favorite debuts of 2018. I think a lot of people will be with me on this. For me, The Kiss Quotient was as close as a book will probably get to being like a perfect romance for me as a reader. I thought that the relationship between Stella and Michael was so healthy, and the way that they communicated with one another was so good to read in comparison to a lot of romances. I loved the representation in this novel. I loved all the sex scenes. They were so well done and so well written, and everything about The Kiss Quotient was fantastic. I had so much fun reading it. I never wanted to put it down, and yeah, it's definitely a highlight of the year for me. Next, I have another of my favorite debuts of 2018, and that is Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This is a young adult contemporary that I would definitely classify as more of a quiet YA. It's one of those books that kind of sneaks up on you and just kind of like comes up behind you and grabs you and doesn't let you go, but you don't realize that it's happening until you're like totally sucked in. I read this in one sitting, and it's very character driven. Again, it's very quiet. It's about this boy named Darius who is half white American and half Persian, Iranian, and he and his family travel to Iran to visit his extended family there who he has never met before. And with this physical, actual journey to Iran comes a journey that Darius goes on as a person. I thought the depression rep and the fat rep were so well done in this. This definitely has queer underpinnings as well. I just think that this was a brilliant exploration of culture and family and identity. And just, I don't understand why more people aren't talking about this, because I think it's so well done. It just kind of grabbed my heart and never let it go. And I feel like this explored a lot of parts of being a teenager that I haven't really ever seen explored, at least not this thoroughly and this well, in young adult before. So I loved this, and I think more people need to read it. Next up, I have a book that will be no surprise to anyone who watches my channel, and that is The Spy with the Red Balloon by Catherine Locke. This is a prequel to my favorite book of last year, which was The Girl with the Red Balloon by Catherine Locke. This is a prequel, but they're definitely both companion novels. You can read them independently of one another, and there's no overlap in terms of story or characters. Only one minor character appears in both. This particular book is set during World War II. It uses the same magic system as Girl with the Red Balloon, and other than that, there's no overlap. So this is set during World War II, and we follow 2 Jewish queer teenage siblings who are recruited by the US government to work on the Manhattan Project, which, if you didn't know, was the building of the atomic bomb. And it was just brilliantly done. And like Girl with the Red Balloon, it makes you think so hard about morality and history and collective memory. And you know, it explored all of the horrible things that the US government was putting people through during World War II, during this time period. And I really appreciated it for that, because I think it's important to acknowledge the bad parts of history with the good. This was so queer, also amazing demisexual rep, and like I mentioned, both siblings in this book, Ilsa and Wolf, are queer and have relationships with people of their same gender. And I absolutely loved this. It's not a particularly happy story. I didn't leave this feeling as hopeful as I did with Girl with the Red Balloon, but made me think just as hard about similar questions. Really enjoyed seeing how this magic system functioned when it was kind of being developed, which was during the time period in which this book was set. And overall, I think this series is just one of the best ever written in young adult fiction, and I don't understand why more people aren't picking it up. And I hope to God that Catherine Locke writes more books set in the Balloon Makers universe in the future. Next, I want to talk about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I feel like I've talked about this book a lot on my channel. I just had so much fun reading this. It's one of the most compulsively readable books that I've read in quite a long time, quite possibly all year, honestly. I just never wanted to put it down. I found the main character, April May, so relatable and so true to life, even when that being true to life was not flattering, if that makes sense. Even though April is making these decisions that as a reader, you're like, oh my god, that is a horrible choice. What are you doing? I completely could see myself making those exact same choices had I been in April's position. This also explored a lot of nuance in terms of internet fame and instant overnight celebrity and the news cycle and the way that politics has become so polarized. Overall, I think this is great. I think it's fun and also has a lot of important social commentary within. So really it ticked all my boxes, and I think that you should pick it up. Next, I have Anger is a Gift by Marco Shiro. Again, one of my favorite debuts of this year. Anger is a Gift follows a very diverse cast of teenagers as their high school is kind of getting an increased police presence. It's a book about systemic oppression that does not purport to have all the answers, and it really serves to capture the scope of the problem of systemic oppression in a way that previous books that have tackled this topic haven't for me. It was a complete gut punch, and it is hopeful, but it won't leave you feeling warm and fuzzy. Like, the book ends and it's very much understood that this is still a problem and it's not gonna go away, and this is something that these characters have to continue facing throughout their lives. And I thought that was really powerful. I just thought this was really great storytelling about an issue that's very timely in US culture right now. Next, I have another book that is pretty polarizing to a lot of people, it seems, and that's What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. I read an arc of this way back in April and it didn't come out till October, so I read it in April and fell in love with it, and then was a little bit surprised to hear all the negative reviews coming in once it got closer to publication. I totally, again, like I've said with all these books with polarizing opinions, like, I do get where people are coming from for sure. Is this longer than it needed to be? Maybe. Really loved Arthur and Ben's relationship, and to me it felt very realistic and true to life. The ending in particular, I just loved the way that it was executed. I thought it was done so well. I know a lot of people have issues with the pop culture references in Becky's books in general and in this book as well, but I love them. I just had so much fun reading this. In a lot of ways, it's a love letter to all of the things that these authors love, and like I say, I just fell in love with this romance, and I loved the New York City setting. It really served to capture like the particular magic of New York City in a way that not a lot of books that I've read have succeeded in doing. Overall, I really loved this, even though a lot of people have not. Okay, now we're getting into the last 3 books. So the first of those is another one that you probably won't be surprised to hear me mentioning on this list if you are a follower of this channel. That is Circe by Madeline Miller. I adored this, and I really did not expect to like this. I think that the brilliance of Circe lies in Madeline Miller's characterization of such a famous figure from Greek mythology. It's a very well thought out characterization and humanization, honestly, of such a like larger than life figure. The writing is lush and lyrical without being overly purple prosy, and I just think that this really succeeds in keeping the epic scope and feeling of Greek mythology, but also at the same time remaining very intimate and character driven, which is a balance that's difficult to strike, and I think Madeline Miller really knocked it out of the park with this. The story values Circe as a woman and as a character, and she's not relegated to the sidelines as she is in so much of Greek myth. I think it's really brilliant. Suffice it to say, this was fantastic, and even if you think you won't like this, I would still recommend picking it up because I was in your same boat and I ended up absolutely falling in love. The second to last book I want to talk to you about is Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton. This again is one that I wasn't sure was going to work for me, but like boy did it work for me. This is one of the most atmospheric books that I read this year. Strange Grace follows 3 teenagers, Mare, Arthur, and Reen, and they live in this village called Three Graces where every 7 years the forest demands a sacrifice in exchange for prosperity for this village for the rest of the time, for 7 more years basically. And in Strange Grace, something starts going wrong with the bargain and the forest demands a sacrifice after 3 years instead of the usual 7. So our 3 main characters head into the forest to kind of find out what's happening. Strange Grace is so atmospheric and immersive, and it really sucks you into this setting. The characters I feel like are where this really succeeds because all 3 main characters are POV characters, and I loved each and every one of them so deeply. We only get a short amount of pages with these characters because this isn't a particularly long book, but you really start to feel a connection with them, which is impressive. And we get the polyamorous relationship of my dreams. It was so well executed, so brilliantly done. One of my favorite romances of any book that I read in 2018. I can't recommend this one highly enough. If you're looking for an atmospheric fall, winter, spooky read, pick this up. So with that, we have made it to my #1 favorite book of 2018. You guys probably already know what it's gonna be, but it is A Heart and a Body in the World by Deb Caletti. This story moved me on such a deep level. It's about our main character, Annabelle, who experiences a really traumatic act of violence and is processing that experience through running across the entire United States from Seattle, Washington to Washington, DC. It's about her processing her grief and recovering from this trauma through this physical act of running. And in my mind, A Heart and a Body in the World succeeded in capturing all of the best parts and all of the worst parts about humanity all in one book, which is just something that you don't see every day. I read a lot of books that I really love and that I really enjoy, but A Heart and a Body in the World is one of those books that as soon as I closed it and flipped to the last page, I was like, this is a book, this is a story that's gonna stick with me for the rest of my life. It really addresses the ways in which toxic masculinity breeds violence, and it addresses how society's expectations of women are damaging in very real, tangible ways. There is a romance in this book that I really enjoyed, but it takes a sideline to the healing that the main character experiences, and just the way that people come together to support the main character in her recovery is so touching. And I just found myself sobbing through a good 3/4 of this because it was so beautifully told. And like I said, it just captures all of the great things and all of the awful things about humans all in one book. I cannot recommend this highly enough. I know I've said that about a lot of books on this list, but truly, if you pick up one of them, pick this one up. It is beautiful, just absolutely beautiful, and this is a story that I'll be thinking about for a very long time to come. With that, we have reached the end of my list of my favorite fiction books of 2018. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned and if they have ended up on your favorites list as well, maybe. And definitely also let me know your favorite book or some of your favorite books from this year, because I'm always looking for a good recommendation. Thank you so much for watching. As always, my social media links will be down below so that we can be friends, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye.